So my talk is on review of the stent-assisted coiling for cerebral aneurysms. No sooner we had the early report on the successful use of endovascular coiling in the treatment of cerebral aneurysms in 1997, as this article reveals. Then a case report was published on a successful use of a coronary stent in the treatment of fusiform aneurysm, which had no other treatment option at that time. That was a ruptured proximal basilar trunk aneurysm. Even now, I don't think still we can do something any better with this kind of ugly lesion. However, after second rupture, the UCSF team devised a creative endovascular solution, which was using a near stent, a quite steep coronary stent in the current point of view for stent-assisted coiling. That was the beginning of so-called assisted coiling. And then several years later, the neuroform came. Although the device was not easy to play with, anyway, they gave us a huge impact in the endovascular treatment of the aneurysms. And the German doctors from Asan reported their first experiences with this prototype stent. Since then, we could overcome those limitations not only by the constant effort of our creative engineer colleague to improve the device performance, but also by the deepening of the understanding of the device itself and the handling of delivery system. These are pictures of currently available stent in Korean market as of now. I'm happy with these devices since I could enjoy them during my embolization procedures because these stents are like Swiss Army tool used by Mr. MacGyver. With this self-expanding stent, we could expand the indication not only for the classic wide neck aneurysms, but also for other various technical purposes, such as bailout of herniated coil loop, etc. See this aneurysm. In the past, I usually try to coil it without stent, since it had shoulders like this. However, now, I'm taking full advantage of using low-profile stents, which help obviate unnecessary repetition of coil repositioning for a good framing formation. Coiling could be a piece of cake simply by having a stent here. Personally, coiling without the stent becomes unimaginable. With that, we can get better coil packing and better long-term angiographic outcome. As with everything in our lives, there is a contrast. Sometimes the stent could also be a troublemaker. It may increase procedural complexity. It requires dual antiplatelets. It also generates MR imaging artifact, which I think is not legalizable, since MRA is the main imaging follow-up tool after coiling. Check out the severity of the signal voice caused by various stents. One of the technical issues is the difficulty in the stent recross due to stent mesh. U-shaping of the guide wire tip could be helpful, however. It may cause stent deformity or stent migration. Sometimes it can interfere microcath navigation into the set. However, in case of difficulty in the stable navigation, intentional staged coiling would be a good option. Separate session of coiling 3 to 6 months after stenting, waiting for re-endothelialization of the stented segment. We can navigate through the stent as if there is no stent mesh like this. A 50-year-old female with a tiny but quite ugly-looking aneurysm was planned to be coiled A small Atlas stent was placed without difficulty. However, after that, it was impossible for us to navigate through the stented segment because of the stent mesh interaction. We quit the initial procedure there and then called the patient back after 4 months. Check out the smooth advancement of the tip of the microcatheter into the sac without touching the stent mesh. You cannot see any DSA subtraction artifact here. There are several potential mechanisms of aneurysm healing after stenting: better neck coverage, more chance of late occlusion, favorable vessel geometry, and flow divergent effect. They say flow divergent effect could be expected even with an open cell stent if it is lateral wall aneurysm like this, not like this relationship. As this meta-analysis shows, use of stents in aneurysm coiling showed a positive result in many aspects. Although there was not much difference in the immediate occlusion rate, use of stents shows progressive occlusion and less recurrence with a little increase of the mortality rate. Various stents are available now. Please check out the several important features from the first stent mesh type to the deployment mechanisms. There are 7 different stents available here in Korea. Some of them are deliverable with the O17 microcasters, which allows delivery of the stent far distal segment. Laser cut or braided stents with or without lead wire. Thickness and the width of the stent struts range between 30 to 80 microns, which are thinner than usual coronary stents. Check out the diversity in the wall coverage, maximum cell size, and degree of foreshortening after stent placement. Owing to the small profile, Atlas stent obviously is easy to deliver. I think this is the best stent for the lesion beyond sacroiliac. Actually, its open cell design could be a double-edged sword. Elvis Jr. is also characterized by its low profile. We need to take advantage of its braided design, allowing angular modification of the branch vessel. Aquilino stent, also easy to deliver, however, deployment could be quite tricky because it has a relatively higher radial force. Enterprise stent. In the earlier experience in our field, advent of this enterprise stent allowed us diversity of stenting procedure, resheathing, semi-gelling, waffle cone technique, etc. I like high visibility of these radial markers on the fluoroscopy. Alpha stent is a locally manufactured closed cell design stent having longitudinal slit-like cells in between the typical closed cells. It allows a better wall opposition with a high radial force. I think this is good for distal ICA lesions showing large diameter tortuous parent artery. Elvis stent. This is my preferred stent in case of very wide neck aneurysms, owing to its versatility in the deployment, which is quite operator dependent. By applying various degrees of pussy and pulls, we can have diverse stenting results. We need to keep in mind that it may shorten significantly during and after delivery. We seldom use this stent for aneurysm coiling. However, I do know some of us still enjoy its benefit of full retrievability. Actually, there had been several trials comparing the performance of each stent head-to-head. However, there was not a single outstanding winner for all situations. I think the proper question on this is not which stent is better, but which stent is better for a certain situation. There could be individual operators' preference in the choice of the stent. However, we need to choose proper stent in different situations since each stent works differently. A simple example is the wall opposition. It is said that open cell stent is better for it. However, we may achieve much better wall opposition with a braided stent if you do the push and pulls very well. If we know the detailed performing mechanism, a known shortcoming could be a characteristic feature of a stent. You can check out other creative applications like this, or temporary stenting an acute ruptured case like this. Catheterization techniques are also waiting for us for more creativity. Regardless of the stenting scheme, I think, a common technical issue is stability during stent deployment. Let me show you a simple case of jailing technique in the coiling of this ophthalmic artery origin ICA aneurysm. An intimated catheter was placed like this. A coiling microcatheter was within the aneurysm sac. The frame coil was partially deployed. Another microcatheter is for stent delivery for jailing. See the deployment process of the enterprise stent here. So it's deploying, unseating, C. Okay, sudden kickback. I think every stent has this kind of problem, more or less. A technical tip to minimize this drop-down problem is keeping the buttressing effect of the delivery system like this. It looks like quite tortuous, but the buttressing strengths of this shape have maintaining the stability of the delivery system. We tend to eliminate this curvature to minimize potential friction during the delivery of the stent. However, with this condition, a little bit of counteraction of the deploying stent may trigger sudden drop down of the whole system. We need to try to keep these curvatures for the stability during deployment. Stent can also be used in case of ruptured aneurysm coiling. However, the incidence of hemorrhagic and ischemic complications was significantly higher than in unruptured cases. There could be two strategic options for a ruptured situation. First, just to protect the rupture point with the partial coiling, and then definitive stent-assist coiling later on. Or stent-assist coiling with full antithrombotic preparation. I think the worst approach is an ambiguous stance. Let me conclude my talk with my future perspective on the role of stent in the aneurysm treatment. There seems to be more rooms to be improved in the current stenting technology. However, the role of stent could partly be replaced by the evolving indications of the flow diverters and the disruptors. The role of stent mimickers may not be significant, I think. Surface modification or coating technology will be developed to obviate long-term dual antiplatelets. I think angular modification of the involved branching vessels could be a good research point exploiting CFD. Thank you very much.